Welcome back to Mainstream PC everyone, my name is Julian and in this video I will be showing you my build for July 2020, which as I alluded to in a previous video, I decided to go for a smaller form factor. I was hoping I could go ITX, but with the current situation, global situation, some parts were hard to come by. So I decided I'll settle on mATX, which I haven't built in for a long time. Well, it's been a while since I did an mATX build, particularly for gaming. I've done a workstation not too long ago, but nothing with a graphics card in it or a discrete graphics card in it. So yeah, let me run you down the components I've chosen. Then you'll see the build process in the video, and in the end there will be an outro where I talk about the build process and maybe some of the hiccups I might have encountered. In a form factor this size, there's usually something not going 100% smooth, but let's see. Let me start off for components with the CPU. Now previously I've crowned the RYZEN 5 3600 as my personal gaming value champion. 6 cores, 12 threads, 4.2 gigahertz boost clock. Overall, for the price, an amazing chip, right? But in the Southeast Asian region where I live, this is a thing, and I would almost say this dethrones the 3600 in terms of value for me for gaming. This is the RYZEN 5 3500. It's smaller brother of the 3600. What's the difference? Well, this is a 6-core 6-thread chip, so SMT or simultaneous multi-threading is disabled on this chip, which means for certain workloads, like mostly for productivity workloads, this is quite an impact. I would say losing SMT or hyperthreading on Intel usually amounts to somewhere to 20 to 30% performance loss. But for gaming, there's not much of a difference here, because you still have 6 full physical cores. Don't forget, threads are just basically an additional pipeline for each core to prepare additional workloads. So it's better for streamlining highly parallelized work, but for gaming this isn't really too helpful, or at least not in most games. I would even be like arguing that hyperthreading isn't beneficial to most any game, even the ones that can utilize high core counts. But at around 65% of the cost of a 3600, you essentially lose about, well, for gaming you pretty much lose nothing with this chip, but for productivity you lose about 20%, 20 to 30%, depending on the application, in performance, while still having a decent price reduction. So for gaming in particular, this is my value champion. 6 full Zen 2 cores for only about 65% of the price of 3600 in this region, at least. That is fantastic. So I was really keen on actually giving this one a spin. They've been around for a little while, but I haven't got around to using one yet. So that's our CPU. Let me put that here for now. And since it's already here, let me talk about this RAM kit. Maybe I'll turn it around. Actually, it doesn't matter. It's very reflective. I hope it's not gonna disturb the camera too much. But essentially, this is a kit from Teamgroup. It's their T-Force Dark Z model. It's 16 gigabytes, so 8x2, single rank memory. And I don't actually want to talk about this kit too much. It's a 3200 megahertz kit, which I'll probably, or most definitely, overclock to 3600 megahertz. It's rated for CAS latency 16 at 3200 megahertz, so we'll probably get CL18 at 3600 megahertz. And I've made a video about this particular kit. I put it in the card up there. To my surprise, this is actually a Samsung B-Die memory kit. So it's using Samsung B-Die, albeit not probably some of the best binned Samsung B-Die modules. But nonetheless, for the price of this thing, it was quite a budget deal, I would say. Very nice to see Samsung B-Die on it. So that will be our RAM. So we'll have 16 gigabytes of that. And we'll be sticking it onto the ASRock B450M Pro 4. I would call this the small brother of the ASRock B450 Fatality Gaming K4, because visually it's very similar in color scheme. It has the same VRM heatsinks, and what really makes it the little sibling is it's got the exact same VRM. So it's the same three-phase design with 42 amp chokes using doublers. So you have 6 power stages essentially. This, or the Gaming K4, or this board, will, with its VRM solution, be absolutely able to handle pretty much any Ryzen 3000 chip that you put on it. I would say at stock, even a 3950X will run on this. Because I've had a 3950X running on the Gaming K4, and this is the same VRM solution. So yeah, it'll run. But overclocking high core count chips, you might want to increase airflow over the VRMs in that case. But at box stock, you won't even need to worry about airflow. The VRMs can absolutely handle this. Other than that, as for the feature set, it's got 2 M.2 slots. I think the same as its bigger brother. One is SATA, one is PCIe 3.0 X4. And other than that, not much to say about it. It's a B450 board. It's got some nice features. It's got USB-C and USB Type-C 3.1 port in the back, which is always nice to have, especially nowadays. And other than that, I don't think there's really much to say about this board. But in my opinion, it's a really good value because these aren't particularly expensive. And they have decent VRMs, albeit not as good as, like, let's say the B450 MSI Arsenal line. Those VRMs are just crazy. Yeah, let me put that down here for now. Storage. I've used this before. I've used it in my last build, and I've used 2 of its predecessor in my personal build, which is the SN550. Western Digital Blue drive. It's an NVMe SSD, doesn't have a DRAM cache, but makes up for it with great memory controller, and SLC cache, albeit it's probably not a lot of SLC cache on it, like probably 10 gigs around there for the 500 gigabyte model, but the controller does a good job of utilizing it, so it actually runs really well for DRAM-less SSD. As I said, I've used the SN500s before, the predecessor, and even those do excellent. Like for boot drives, you're more than fine with this drive. So 500 gigabytes of SSD storage. I'm thinking of adding a hard drive to this build, but let me see about that. Because it's supposed to be a gaming build, and like 500 gigs nowadays with the size of games is quite limited, so I'm thinking to add a little bit more in form of a spinning hard drive. Then let's talk about the graphics card, the coup de grace. Well, since this build is meant to be a 1080p gaming rig, So usually I like to aim for 1440p, but I kind of let me talk about the theme of the build a little bit later. Let's just talk about the graphics card for now. This is the ASUS GTX 1660 Super Tough Gaming edition, and in this case it's the X3. The X3 just signifies it's the triple fan model. I'm not sure, it doesn't actually say the name on the box like X3, but there's a dual fan model of this card, and when you look it up online, I think it does say X3 in the model number, so I hope that's somewhat correct in the nomenclature. But why did I pick a 1660 Super? I feel like a 1650 Super is probably better FPS per dollar, but it's a little too low in spec for what I want to achieve. I want to have a 1080p gaming machine that can run modern titles at 60 plus frames with high to ultra or maximum settings or maximum presets in graphic fidelity. So I feel the 1650 Super just falls a little bit short on that. Obviously not in all games, but in some more visually appealing titles or higher graphically demanding titles, I feel like it does. So I decided I want a 1660 Super. And the amazing thing about this GPU in general is it's the same as the 1660, but as NVIDIA likes to do, the 1660 is artificially limited by its memory bandwidth. So I think the bandwidth of the 1660 is only 192 or some gigabytes per second, while this thing runs at 336. I might somewhere around there, around 330 gigabytes per second on the memory bandwidth out of the box. The reason for that being is it's not got a wider memory bus or anything like that. It's the same graphics silicon, the same die on here, and the same amount of memory modules, but it's GDDR6 memory instead of GDDR5 memory. And there's a lot of performance to be had on that. And when you look at the 1660 Ti, which in my opinion NVIDIA has pretty much made obsolete with the release of this card, it's even that only has like a 280 or something gigabytes per second memory bandwidth. So this exceeds the memory bandwidth of the more expensive card, albeit it has less shaders on its graphics processor. But when you overclock this card, like memory and core, you can achieve better overclocks than you can achieve on the 1660 Ti. So I've seen quite a few people reach better numbers, like higher frames per second in a lot of titles on their overclocked 1660 Super than on their 1660 Ti's or somewhat relatable models. So that's quite impressive. For me, this seems like I didn't really want to go RTX for this. RTX 2060, even Super, is, I don't know, it's such a weird niche card. Like it's like not strong enough to really do ray tracing. There's performance nowadays. There's an appeal in having support for DLSS 2.0, which I really enjoy, but that's only in some games. And for 1080p, I don't know. I feel like you can just rely on rasterized performance and go with something that's quite a bit cheaper and still get great results. So I think the 1660 Super for me was, after a lot of deduction whether I should go lower or higher, the perfect middle ground for this build, also in terms of price, because I kind of want to keep it a budget build for 1080p gaming. So let me quickly just say there's a dual fan model, and I think there's a minimal difference with having a triple fan model over the dual fan model, because I don't think there's more heat pipes or anything coming off the cooler or anything like that in the triple fan model over the dual fan model. but the case I chose can accommodate this card, and I feel like it has like a nice imposing look. I quite like the tough shroud, and we're going to talk about this a little bit. So I felt like I just want to have a nice GPU hanging in there. So that's the reason I picked the larger model. No, not for any firmware issues, because the 1660 Super doesn't really draw a lot of power. I don't think it'll draw anywhere near 150 watts even, so that should be completely fine. Like, you could cool that with a single fan probably. In terms of the tough model, the tough gaming model, I was very skeptical initially about buying this card because of how badly the tough gaming model of the Radeon card is doing on firmware performance. Particularly, the problem there seems to be that the cooler on the Radeon tough models isn't really touching the memory modules, or it's at least making bad contact. And that really is detrimental to the performance of those cards. So I was quite worried if this is going to have the same issue, especially since this is running on GDDR6 memory, but it's not. The shroud is the same, but the cooler underneath is actually physically different, because obviously the PCB and the layout of the components is different between the Radeon cards and the NVIDIA cards. So luckily this cooler is making proper contact with all the important components, which is memory modules and the GPU die. And I do not expect that this card will, even with overclocks, reach anywhere near 75 degrees, probably just south of that. So yeah, that's my reasoning for the graphics card. And let's talk about power delivery. So for power delivery, I chose the FSP Hexa 85 Plus 550 watt model. I just want to quickly interject. I've read online some people saying like, oh, you should go for a name brand PSU when somebody posted an FSP model. FSP is a name brand PSU maker. In fact, they are one of the more common or more reputable OEMs out there. They are the OEMs for original equipment manufacturer for most of the EVGA Supernova PSUs, which are excellent. So yeah, just know that this is a decent brand, but with every brand it always comes down to model. So each model, there can be crap models, there can be good models, it doesn't matter. Seasonic has crappy PSUs as well. They have excellent PSUs as well. So does Superflower, and yeah, Corsair as well. Whatever. As soon as you go into the value or whatever VP or whatever line of Corsair, you're not getting a great power supply out of that either. But it says Corsair on it, and some people just buy the brand. But let me talk about this one a little bit. So I did quite a bit of research on this. It's a single rail or single 12 volt rail unit. Love that. It's got protections, most everything. It's got short circuit protection, over power protection, over voltage protection, over current protection, and over temperature protection. And what it doesn't have is undervolt protection, which in the C region is not really that. It doesn't really matter anyway, because most people here use a UPS, and if you're not, you should be. Brownouts are rather common, so I wouldn't expect anyone to run a gaming PC or a workstation or anything without some sort of surge protection and or a UPS. So single 12 volt rail, talked about that. As for the components, they're actually quite decent. It's an 80 plus bronze unit, unfortunately not modular. It's got no sleeved cables either, so those are the cutbacks I guess they had to make to keep the price in check. But as for components, they didn't skimp out. So the main capacitors are Nichicon Japanese-made capacitors. The components inside on the teardowns look okay. The only thing that that I've seen people talk about and noticed as well when I saw the teardown. The primary coil is a little bit small, especially like for the 550 watt model. I feel like it should be a little larger. But which also leads to the fact that if this actually runs at peak wattage, that coil gets pretty warm. In the end of the day, I don't expect we're going to get anywhere near that peak wattage anyway, because I don't think we're even going to reach 300 watts with the components we have in there. And that's despite the fact that I'm absolutely planning to overclock the CPU. I forgot to mention that. The CPU, it's his little brother, it's the same amount of cores, but they also limit the boost clock to 4.1 gigahertz. But since it's the same silicon, we're absolutely going to overclock that thing to 4.2 gigahertz all core. I just hope we can do it at a low enough voltage to keep the temperatures in check, because I'm only using the stock cooler. But I think we'll get there. As for this, yeah, the coil gets warm under peak load, but I don't think we're, like, even with my system, a 1080 Ti plus a 3950X that I have in my main workstation, I don't get anywhere near 450 watts, no matter what stress test I run on it. So this should be absolutely fine. So that's it for the internal components, and I hope the audio will be fine. This is the Silverstone PS15. It's an mATX case. What looked interesting to me personally was the mesh front. That was the first thing that drew my attention. Tempered glass side panel, very nice. It looked spacious enough for me to not really worry, especially also with the graphics card. Made sure that works. I think here it says 314 millimeters maximum length for the expansion slots. And the only thing that I didn't particularly, or let's talk about a couple of things that I didn't particularly like. The front mesh doesn't have a dust filter behind it, so that's a little bit of a turn-off for me, but not dramatic. What's much more worrisome, especially in combination with my power supply, is the fact that there's no PSU shroud. So there's no way to hide the cables effectively, except for probably behind the motherboard tray. And looking at the width of the case, which is only 192 millimeters, I don't think there's a lot of space behind that motherboard tray. So let's see if that's going to be a problem to keep the build somewhat tidy. But I'll do my best. Other than that, this particular configuration that I ordered comes with two RGB fans in the front. Notably, those are RGB fans, not ARGB fans. So we're not going to get rainbow wave or anything like that. But we have the option to pick any of the 16 million, whatever the advertised colors. And the good thing is our motherboard actually has an RGB header, a 12 volt RGB or 12 volt 4-pin RGB header. So we can hook up both those fans. It comes with rear exhaust installed in all configurations as far as I remember. Has a dust filter on the top. Okay, great. Would have much preferred one in the front behind the mesh, but okay. And other than that, there's not really much about it. There's a hard drive cage in there from what I've seen. Since I'm planning to use a spinning hard drive, I can't even misuse that as a way to hide the cables. So let's see. The cables will have to either be bunched up between the PSU and the hard drive cage, or they will have to go behind the motherboard tray. I hope I can fit them behind the motherboard tray because they're very colorful and I like to have as little of them showing as possible. But beggars can't be choosers, and this is a budget build, so I'll have to deal with what I get and what I'm gonna be able to achieve. As usual with my builds, I kind of give them a name and a theme. And this time around I was like, okay, this is sort of, it's a budget build, right? It's a smaller build. And I feel like it's like not gonna look like it's a punching, high or anything. Like it's a strong machine particularly. But I feel like this will absolutely drive modern titles at 16 frames in highest settings. Should absolutely be possible with this at 1080p. And of course esports titles in excess of 200 frames per second probably. So I was like, what would be a good name? It's like something small but strong, but you don't expect it. So I call it Dark Horse. For those of you who might not know what Dark Horse means, it's like an underdog. It's like the horse in the race that you don't expect to win and then suddenly it does win. So this is my Dark Horse build. And now that we've talked about all the stuff that's gonna go in there, let me put it in and then I'll see you in the outro. And we're back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the build process. I quite enjoyed it. The only thing that was a little bit of a hassle, but it usually is cable management, or was cable management. But in this case in particular, and in this case, I mean in this case, yeah, as I said, with the width that they gave for how much CPU cooler clearance there is on this case, and the total width of the case, I was already kind of suspecting that I will be scrounging for space to put all the extra cables. And in the end of the day, that's exactly what happened, right? Especially when I installed that hard drive, and I couldn't use the hard drive cage anymore to hide cables, I had to move everything towards the back panel, or rather behind the motherboard tray. So I'm not sure if I could have done a much better job, because bundling them up is what I would normally do if the thickness would allow it. But there's so little space that essentially anything more than like 8 or 10 wires on top of each other So essentially just a regular 24-pin connector was already pretty much the limit. Like if that was overlapping something else, that was already pretty on the limit of how wide this can go without actually like pushing against the side panel or bulging it. So you saw me like laying it out first and then zip tying it down, because yeah, I there was no real other way to do this without, like, the other option would have been like bundling them up and just leaving them behind the hard drive cage and the power supply, which I considered, but I kind of already felt like it's a little constrained in here for like air and everything. So I didn't really want another, especially not another dust magnet in there. So I was like, okay, let's move it behind the motherboard tray and just spread it out as much as possible so it wouldn't have any too bulgy or too thick areas, like where too many cables overlap, and so I can still put on the side panel comfortably. Other than that, I think it was pretty smooth sailing. Very easy build. The only thing that I kind of notice is the limited amount of space between the power supply and the graphics card. Now, the last time I built in an mATX case, I didn't have a graphics card. That was the first thing. And the one before that, when I built in an mATX where I did have a discrete graphics card, there was no such thing as 2.5 slot designs like this. So I think it might have been the same, but actually I think back then the PSU was on the top, so essentially it was just close to the bottom, but there was a bit more space than we have here. Although I'm not too worried. First of all, I'm not too worried about this graphics card getting too hot in the first place because of how much power it draws. Secondly, it still has two fans have pretty decent access to air. This one will have to strain or stretch his legs a little bit to get enough air in there, but I'm not too worried about it overall. I'm kind of glad actually that I went with the triple fan design now. Other than that, not much to say about the case. It's a budget case. It's not super rigid, but it's not flimsy. The sheet metal is adequate. It's Silverstone. It's a reputable brand. Wouldn't expect much less of them. Any less of them. Other than that, yeah, I kind of like a hard drive. I kind of regret not having a 2.5-inch hard drive, because that I would have been able to mount with rubber grommets on the top, and you kind of just slide them in. And then that would have sat on top of the hard drive cage, which would have allowed me to use the hard drive cage for cable management again. But I really didn't want to just leave this build with just a 500 gig boot drive. So yeah, since it's a gaming machine and games nowadays take up so much space, I just really felt like, okay, there needs to be a hard drive in there as well. Other than that, yeah, I hope I connected the RGB headers correctly, because the 12 volt 4-pin RGB headers don't really have an arrow to indicate which one is ground, or at least these ones didn't. So I think I only have a 25% chance that I did it correctly, but I think I straightened them out and checked. I think at least one connection should be correct. Other than that, I think that's it for the build process itself. Nothing surprising, nothing fancy. I'm sorry, I had some trouble with my cameras, so I think I probably have a few cuts in there. But yeah, it is what it is. My equipment is budget, just like this case. Let's see if this puppy boots. I mean, I had the components on my test bench already, so I expect it should, unless I I fried something in the build process. Okay, light is on the graphics card, that's good. The only thing I didn't have on in combination is the graphics card. So. Okay, RGB fans are connected properly, and that's still my RGB connection from, or RGB settings from before, I think, on the motherboard. In the ASRock polychrome. Really? Cool. Awesome. Actually, it's the same processes and same processor on the test bench and same RAM on the test bench. So, yeah, it didn't detect the hardware change because all I changed is the graphics card. And it's even running the RAM at 3600 megahertz, which I already tested. 16 gigabytes of RAM detected, Ryzen 5 3500 6-core processor, already overclocked. Yeah, that's it then for this build. I hope you enjoyed the build. I enjoy it every time, even if some of them are more difficult than others. I still just enjoy and love building PCs. And I enjoy making these videos because it allows me to build more PCs. And so if you like this kind of content, please like, share, and subscribe. If you want to see the next benchmark video that I'll do on this build, don't forget to hit the notification bell so you get notified when I upload that video. And in general, thank you for watching. Again, sharing helps me out the most, just trying to hit or reach a broader audience. So if you have any like-minded friends out there, share this video with them. I hope they enjoy building computers as much as I do, then they'll enjoy this video too. And see you again next time. This was Julian with Mainstream PC. Cheers!